Part 89. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Enchenmi-san. Chapter 915. Kaylan immediately chose to retreat backwards, keeping a distance from the beast, and at the same time taking this opportunity to observe the opponent's weaknesses, but what left him speechless was that the beast was covered in the unique nano alloy. Under the shiny scales, there are no weak spots to attack. It had no eyes or exposed nostrils, and its big mouth remained closed. Even when it pounced on Kaylan, it showed no sign of opening to bite. It's like a perfect iron bucket, making it impossible to start. Such a monster must have mutated in the next 500,000 years, otherwise, the weapons carried by the dignitaries in the upper city who participated in the hunt would not be able to break through this guy's defense. This guy is covered in scales. 33 on the side shot more than a dozen black flying blades at the monster, but failed to achieve any results. I want to try to seduce it. If I give it a chance to attack, it may choose to open its mouth and bite me. At that time, I can take the opportunity to attack the inside of its mouth. This thing will not even cover the inside of its mouth. Scale armor, right. After Kaylan finished speaking, he stopped, no longer retreating, and assumed a posture ready to respond to the impact. The limbs of this crocodile-like monster, no, to be precise, they should be its 16 limbs. They are also as short as the crocodile and can only be used for crawling and cannot be used as weapons. So what does this monster want? The only way to cause fatal damage to prey is through biting. The depth of that big mouth accounts for about a quarter of the body's length. Although it has not been opened, Kaylan can completely imagine the teeth inside are as sharp as saw blades. The crocodile's attack method is relatively simple, which is to bite the prey with a huge bite force, and then tear the entire piece of meat from the prey, or shake the head to break the prey in the mouth. But no matter which method, when biting the prey, he will expose the relatively soft inside of his mouth to the prey. This is the attack opportunity that Kaylan wants to seize. Be careful, 33 shouted, I'm always ready to help. No problem. Kaylan stretched out his right arm forward, and a red fluid as thick as plasma quickly seeped out from the pores. First, it accumulated into several blood-colored tentacles as thick as a handful, and then these tentacles were wrapped around each other. Twisted together, a strange limb over 1 meter long was instantly formed. This extended arm is the bait that Kaylan uses to induce the monster in front of him to open its mouth. As long as the opponent bites this arm formed by the living armor, the living armor can directly attack inside the monster's mouth. Kaylan even thought about the subsequent attack route. Hundreds of spikes will be generated directly from the top of the arm, piercing the monster's upper jaw and reaching the brain. However, until the extended arm formed by the living armor reached the monster's body, the monster did not open its mouth to bite. Although Kaylan could not find the monster's eyes, he vaguely seemed to feel that the monster was facing. He showed a contemptuous and mocking look. This guy has a very high IQ. He has seen through my intentions. This was Kaylan's first reaction, but before he could change his move, the monster suddenly turned around in mid-air in an extremely unreasonable manner, using its thick long tail to force the ground hit Kaylan's chest, and Kaylan flew away like a ball. Kaylan could clearly hear the sound of his ribs being broken. Even with the double protection of the living armor and Z-logo, his chest still sunk, and his internal organs ruptured under the huge pressure. He hadn't even hit the ground yet. Red blood has already overflowed from the 7 orifices. According to this momentum, Kaylan's flying body was enough to break a towering tree at the waist up to his waist. Fortunately, the living armor finally reacted and generated a large amount of foam-like buffer layer behind Kaylan. The edges of these buffer layers are solidified into hard grappling hooks, clinging to the ground tightly, covering Kaylan's body like inflatable nets. Kaylan crashed through 4 buffer layers in a row, and the soil on the ground was plowed up by the grappling hook to a depth of nearly half a meter before the force could be stopped. Kaylan. Are you okay? 33 asked anxiously. Cough, 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 it's okay, spit, Kaylan spat out a mouthful of blood with internal organs fragments, and got up from the ground with some difficulty. An ordinary 9th level enhanced person would never be able to bear this kind of injury. In other words, they would have died suddenly on the spot the moment they were hit by the monster's tail. Ian's survival was all due to the protection of his living armor and his extremely abnormal self-healing ability. The damaged organs were recovering rapidly, and the broken and dislocated bones were returning to their original positions under the push of the living armor. In less than 2 seconds, Ian's mangled body returned to normal, without even the split flesh. Leaves scars. The only difference from before was probably the damaged clothes and the blood stains on his body and face that had not been wiped off in time. I underestimated the enemy, and also underestimated the opponent's strength, Kaylan said. This time, he did not dare to relax at all, and directly covered his whole body with living armor, and even condensed a 3-meter-long hunting spear in his hand. Is this guy's power really that terrifying? 33 immediately flew out after seeing Kaylan fighting with this monster, but the monster just rolled in mid-air, adjusted its posture, and neutralized it. The recoil force landed firmly on the ground. Since I met Kaylan on the 33rd, this was the first time I saw Kaylan deflated and looking so embarrassed. It's scary, Kaylan nodded. I'm glad that he chose me as the target. If it were you, you would probably be dead by now. This sentence is not an exaggeration at all, if calculated according to the level of human enhancement. Well, it seems that it really can't be calculated. Human enhancement is currently capped at level 10. Starting from level 8, the strength increase at each level is about 50% to 120%. This value is also closely related to the enhancer's body shape, degree of body transformation and other factors. It is not there is a fixed value like in a video game. Assuming that Kaylan himself is used as the reference for the 9th level enhanced person, the power erupted from the tail flick just now is at least that of Kaylan using his physical strength to whip out a whip leg without the assistance of living armor and space power. More than 8 times. Assuming that the enhancement levels above level 10 are based on a doubled increase ratio, then this monster has the strength of a 12-level enhanced person at least. This is a value that is hard to imagine. It is true that there are many creatures on Alpha Planet that are far more powerful than level 9 enhanced humans, but these creatures all have one thing in common, that is, they are extremely large in size, like the one in front of you. Very few creatures possess such powerful power. The main reason why there are limitations in living organisms is because of the strength relationship between muscles and bones. If the physical strength is too strong, it will most likely destroy the user's own body before it is used, like for some powered armors or exoskeletons with relatively strong power systems. If the user's body is relatively weak, muscle strains or even fractures may occur if the user makes a few violent movements, even if they do not need to control the limbs. Large-scale mechas or other vehicles participating in sports also have the problem of G-force load. Kaylan now strongly suspects that not only the scales on this crocodile-like monster are made of nanoalloy, but perhaps even its bones are made of high-purity nanoalloy. As for the soft tissue between the muscles and bones, then the strength is certainly higher than any material currently created by humans. If this monster was obtained by the researchers who study bionics and materials science in the Institute, it would definitely be a treasure. Unfortunately, the only thing Kaylan can think about now is how to kill it. This monster cannot bite, and its claws are difficult to attack, but its body itself is the most powerful weapon, just like a python, which is also a reptile. The python does not have fatal toxins, nor is it powerful enough to bite large prey to death. It has long tusks and no claws, but its thorny body can easily strangle prey of similar size to itself, relying on its own strong muscle strength. Never engage in close combat with this guy, Kaylan warned 33, this guy's power is almost equal to a level 12 enhanced person. Level 12? Isn't the highest level of enhanced human being only level 10? 33 was stunned for a moment, unable to react to Ian's statement. It's equivalent to 4 times the maximum strength of a level 10 enhanced person. Just the moment it knocked me away, Kaylan said. This monster is lying 20 meters away from Kaylan at the moment. It has 16 feet on the ground at the same time, its elbows are slightly bent, and its abdomen is close to the ground. It is keeping up with Kaylan in a posture that can launch a pounce at any time. Confrontation. Its IQ is not low, but at this time, it seems to be wondering why the prey that should have died actually climbed up from the ground like a normal person. As the overlord of this area, creatures that are more than 10 times or even dozens of times larger than it are no match for it, but the human in front of it makes it feel a hint of threat. Good guy, so scary. 33 made some calculations in his mind. Even a mecha of this size doesn't have this kind of power, right? Except for those disposable toys that are equipped with a lot of thrusters, Kaylan said. Unless it is a pure nano alloy frame, no body frame can withstand such an intense impact. What you mean is that not only the shell of this thing is made of nano alloy, but also the bones. 33 took a breath of cold air and subconsciously took 2 steps back. He knew very well that he might not be able to intervene in the battle between Kaylan and this monster. Not only the scales and bones, the muscles and internal organs also have terrifying strength, Kaylan said. When I fight with it later, I will try to get rid of the scales on it. Then you can just use black attacking the exposed flesh with the flying blade, may have some effect. Understood. 33 nodded and retracted the extra black flying blades, leaving only a 30 cm long armor-piercing cone with prismatic reinforcements added to its 8 sides suspended directly in front of the palm of his hand. Ready to attack at any time. He knew that even if those black flying blades, which were about the same size as razor blades, could pierce into the monster's body, they would not cause any effective damage. Instead of scraping with hundreds of black flying blades, it would be better to concentrate all the power on this broken blade. On the armor cone, try to see if you can stab this monster to the core. The short and tense confrontation ended without warning. Kaylan only saw the muscles on the monster's arm contract slightly, and the monster disappeared from the place, turning into a black shadow and heading straight towards him. This, in addition to the speed of the thing, it even left an afterimage in the dust raised behind it. This kind of explosive acceleration would be difficult to achieve even with a disposable vehicle packed with rocket thrusters. Kaylan immediately swung the hunting spear in his hand, although it was said that he swung it out. In fact, his arm did not move at all. Instead, the spear body was lengthened by the change of the living armor, and it stabbed the black shadow that was approaching instantly. Just when the hunting spear was about to come into contact with the black shadow, the sharp spearhead suddenly expanded and turned into an irregular polygonal hammer body, which hit the black shadow heavily. Armor-piercing weapons are generally divided into 2 extremes. One is a short, hard, and sharp armor-piercing cone, which relies on its own hardness to forcefully penetrate the enemy's armor and damage the flesh behind the armor. However, this kind of armor-breaking cone has very high requirements for materials. If the enemy's armor hardness is much higher than that of the armor-breaking cone, it will not have any armor-breaking effect. Another armor-breaking weapon chooses a completely different idea: blunt weapon. Blunt weapons completely abandon sharp edges and spikes, and rely purely on weight and strength to complete the strike. Even if the enemy is wearing heavy armor, the power contained in the blunt weapon can be transmitted through the armor itself, shattering the internal organs of the armor piercer. When facing a monster whose whole body was covered in nano-alloy scales, Kaylan chose the second armor-breaking method. Bang! The loud sound of the hammerhead colliding with the monster's body was heard. Kaylan and 33 felt a buzzing in their ears. At the same time, an extremely terrifying repulsive force was also transmitted along the handle of the hammer to K-Ian's hand. K-Ian's palm suddenly became numb. If it weren't for the handle of the mallet being connected to the living armor, he might have let go at this time. The tiger's mouths of K-Ian's hands were all torn apart, and the blood flowed out and was quickly absorbed by the mallet handle condensed from the living armor, Although this hammer failed to cause any damage to the monster, it at least successfully blocked the opponent's offensive. The monster that flew over was smashed into the ground. PS Thanks to ZQ73 for the reward of 1,500 starting coins. Thank you for the reward of 100 starting coins. Alien Relic Hunter Author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 916. In fact, it cannot be said that there was no damage at all. There were several severely deformed black scales attached to the front of the hammer head. These scales should have been torn off by the huge force of the impact, but the weakness of this monster was not exposed under the surface scales. There is a second, smaller and smaller layer, but also denser scales. This structure is similar to the ancient layered armor. The moment after the monster was smashed into the ground, it jumped up with the flying soil and rushed towards Kaylan again. Just when Kaylan was about to swing the armor-breaking hammer again, the monster that had already closed the distance repeated its trick. The powerful tail swept across Kaylan's neck. Kaylan had just used his chest to resist the opponent's flick. Even his spine was broken and several sections were displaced. Compared to the torso, the neck was thinner and more fragile. If he was hit, the entire head might be separated from the body. Fly far away. At that time, even if he has super recovery ability, Kaylan cannot guarantee whether he can still survive after his body and head are separated. Kaylan could only give up attacking and choose to retreat. The living armor seeped out from his back and condensed into a tentacle as thick as a handful. The end of the tentacle was a three-pronged barb. The moment it was thrown out, it hooked onto the ground and pulled Kaylan's body. Pulled back. The monster's tail barely brushed Kaylan's cheek and was thrown over. It did not hit directly, but the strong wind it brought cut Kaylan's cheek to pieces, even exposing his pale facial bones and teeth. Compared to losing his head, this little flesh injury is nothing. Anyway, it will be back to normal in a few seconds. Kaylan thought to himself. He took out his gravity gun several times to attack, but when he thought about it, the effect of the gravity gun was just to multiply the gravity exerted on a certain area. Even the inner wall of the garbage channel made of lead alloy could not press against it. It collapsed, let alone the steel and iron monster in front of him. In the physical sense, iron bones. 33 on the side could only watch anxiously. Kaylan was obviously at a disadvantage. He also wanted to help Kaylan, but he was completely unable to intervene and could only wait for Kaylan to create an opportunity for him to attack. But the problem is that Kaylan can only keep retreating in embarrassment now. Let alone attacking, even dodging is becoming gradually difficult. This monster kept swinging its tail to sweep across a large area. Kaylan didn't even dare to use his weapon to confront the opponent's tail head-on. As long as he made contact with the tail, the huge power attached to it would directly control Kaylan's weapon. For Lan to fly out, unless Kaylan softens the living armor at the moment of contact, but in this case, it will be difficult for the soft weapon to burst out with enough power, and it will not even be able to smash down a few scales like just now. Arrive. It's not like Kaylan has never thought of transforming his weapon into a chain weapon like a meteor hammer, but now the monster is chasing after him, and the distance between the two is very tight. He belongs to the kind of person who will be beaten if he slows down even a little. The tail hit so hard that there was no room for the meteor hammer to be swung and charged. The previous idea of minimizing the movement as much as possible has been thrown away at this time. In the fight between Kaylan and the monster, large areas of the forest were leveled, and when the towering giant trees were hit by the tail, several people hugged each other, and the thick tree trunk was torn apart and broken easily as if it were made of paper. Rumbling sounds followed one after another along with the tremors of the ground. Fortunately, the monster in front of him seemed to be the overlord of this area. Even if it caused such a big movement, no other creatures nearby were attracted, allowing Kaylan to focus all his attention on a single opponent. This can't go on like this. Kaylan began to become anxious. If Ze Lugo assists, this battle will become very easy. The power of space can even be used to forge nano-alloy. It is not a problem to flatten and round this monster, but the problem is that Ze-Logo's ability cannot be used in the upper city. The only way is to flatten this monster. Where to lead to the garbage channel? But, will this guy really be lured away from the jungle hunting ground by himself? There seems to be a layer of invisible and intangible restrictions on the edge of the jungle hunting ground. Not only will the trees in the hunting ground not cross the edge boundary even half an inch, but even the animals in the hunting ground will not run outside the hunting ground. Although this cannot be confirmed for the time being, apart from the two people's previous simple investigation of the uptown area, except for some bugs similar to mutated cockroaches, no creatures were found in the eastern half of the uptown area. Those cockroaches probably did not escape from the jungle hunting ground, but originally lived in the nooks and crannies of the upper city. When humans disappeared in the hive city, they became the only creatures active among the ruins of buildings. There are definitely more creatures left in the jungle hunting ground than the crocodile-like monster in front of you, but no matter what kind of creature it is, they would rather risk being eaten by stronger creatures than leave this dangerous hunting ground and go to a less competitive place. The external world is smaller but more vast. This speaks volumes. 33, Kaylan suddenly shouted loudly. "I'm here," 33, who had been watching the battle for a long time, responded quickly. "What do you want me to do?" Before Kaylan could finish his words, he was interrupted by an embarrassing roll of his own. His right hand, which he couldn't pull back in time, was hit by the monster's tail. The entire palm was cut off at the root, and the blood suddenly seemed to be smashed. It spurted out like a faucet. "Your hand," 33 bit his back molars hard. Although he knew that with Ian's recovery ability, a brand new hand would grow out of the broken ground in a few minutes, but it can also be seen that Ian's dodge space has become much smaller than before, and the choices left to him have become more and more embarrassing. It's okay, it will grow back later, but in fact, Kaylan couldn't wait for those few minutes at all. He could only use the living armor to condense a bright red prosthetic hand on the broken wrist, and used his strength he pushed himself up on the ground and pushed his body to one side with the strength from his wrists and elbows. After narrowly avoiding another attack, Kaylan had time to finish the sentence he just left unfinished: "Let's retreat to the edge of the forest. I guess this guy can't leave this place." "Then what if it can be done?" 33 asked as he retreated. "Then we can only use the building debris in the upper city to deal with it. To be honest, I hope to see the situation. As long as I can lead it into the garbage channel, I can use Ze-Logo's power to solve it." After paying the price of an arm and a calf, Kaylan finally succeeded in leading the monster to the edge of the jungle hunting ground. Strangely enough, when Kaylan retreated outside the boundary line, the monster immediately stopped the pursuit. Although it was very close, it seemed like there was a space barrier between it and Kaylan, completely separating the two. "It's really not chasing it anymore," 33 gasped. Kaylan and the monster were moving very fast. 33 had to move at full speed to ensure that they could withdraw from the jungle area before them. Otherwise, Kaylan would. If Lan exits first, the monster will turn around and attack him. He didn't have the confidence to survive this monster's stormy attack like Kaylan did. "Ha, we have retreated to the safe zone." Kaylan looked at the boundary line 3 steps ahead, feeling like looking at the light curtain in the safe zone of the main city in an online game, and couldn't help but he let out a long breath. He had experienced many tough battles before, but this was the first time for him to be in such an embarrassing situation where his hands and feet were cut off, and his whole body was disemboweled and his internal organs were shattered. But at least it also made Kaylan know the limits of his recovery ability. As long as his head is not smashed, he can recover on his own regardless of the severity of the injury. 33 and his teammates would not be surprised by this. If it were anyone unfamiliar with Kaylan, they would definitely suspect that Kaylan is a monster. Although one head maintains a humanoid appearance, it has a monster even more monstrous than that crocodile with 8 pairs of legs. Strictly speaking, This statement is actually correct. I am a monster, but I am also a human being, Kaylan said silently in his heart. The monster here refers to the crocodile with 8 pairs of legs. Not Kaylan did not leave, but looked at Kaylan across the boundary of the hunting ground. Even at its current location, Kaylan still hasn't found where its eyes are, or maybe this guy doesn't have a visual organ in the conventional sense. Although the boundary of the jungle hunting ground could block its pace, it could not block its perception. It squatted at the edge of the hunting ground, as if waiting for Kaylan to step into it again. Kaylan is naturally not in a hurry to give away heads. This is the same as fighting a boss in the game. Blindly repeating challenges is the least efficient way to pass the level. Only after each attempt, summarizing experience, improving techniques and equipment, and adjusting the state can be the most scientific strategy plan. Kaylan first waited for his broken limbs to grow back, then walked back and forth a few times close to the edge of the jungle hunting ground, carefully observing the monster from different angles. No, it should be called Epsilon level mutant number 14 now. If we want to be more accurate, it would be the 500,000-year evolution version of Epsilon level mutant No 14. Just when he fought with this monster, some memory fragments were unlocked in the depths of Ian's mind. However, the battle just now was too intense, and his brain had no time to process other information besides fighting. And then shelved the matter temporarily. The monsters put into the hunting ground by the Nest City are all mutants artificially created and cultivated based on the genes of the Earth's creatures. They will be given different levels according to the strength of the mutants. The levels are taken from the order of Greek letters, with alpha alpha in sequence 1 being the smallest and omega omega in sequence 24 being the largest. Alpha here has nothing to do with Alpha Planet or Alpha Civilization. Of course, according to the information mentioned in the memory fragments, it is not only the omega level that only exists in theory. In fact, all levels after Theta Theta are empty titles. Hive City Civilization, the strongest mutant creatures created are limited to the Theta level of sequence 8. The giant saber-toothed tiger that number 32 encountered previously was only a gamma level sequence 3, while the crocodile Kaylan encountered was an epsilon level sequence 5. The 14th registered epsilon class mutant. It's just that this is already data from 500,000 years ago. At that time, apart from its large size, this crocodile was no different from normal crocodiles on the Earth. It only had 4 legs and did not have layers of nanoalloy scales on its body. Just the cuticle of the skin has the ability to enrich metal elements. Creatures with similar abilities can be found in large numbers in the wasteland of planet Alpha. Nanoalloy is definitely not the same thing as ordinary metal elements. The smelting conditions of nanoalloy are extremely harsh. Not only does it require an ultra-high pressure environment, but it also requires a type of element in the periodic table that can only be obtained on a mysterious planet. New elements. This new element only exists on the planet where the escaped engineering ship once parked. It does not exist on Earth or on Alpha Planet. It is precisely for this reason that the Alpha civilization with such a high level of technology can only energy crystals can be reproduced, but nanoalloy cannot be reproduced. If it were just an ordinary epsilon level mutant, Ian's power alone could easily complete a single kill, but in 500,000 years, this epsilon level mutant has obviously a huge change occurred. If it were to be re-rated, Kaylan felt that it could at least reach the kappa level of sequence 10, or even higher. Judging from the information provided in the memory fragments, even the strongest mutants created by the Hive civilization, Theta level number 1, number 2, and number 3, are definitely not as powerful as the crocodile in front of them. Although Theta class number 1, number 2, and number 3 only mentioned one name, there are successful hunting records. Number 1 was successfully hunted by 14 hunters, and the number of number 2 increased to 50. 1, as for number 3, was a little less impressive. He was killed by the Daikyo people in the qualifiers, but the Daikyo people also paid nearly 200 casualties for this. Vaguely, A very bold idea suddenly appeared in Ian's mind. Could these mutants of some level be the originators of the indigenous creatures on planet Alpha? Many indigenous creatures on planet Alpha can find some similar shadows in these mutants. It is precisely because of this that many of the indigenous creatures on Alpha Planet make the people on the Ark feel that they have many similarities with some creatures on Earth. P.S. Thanks to Wandering DNA Vest for the 1,500 starting coins. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter, author, and Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 917. Looking at the descendant of the Epsilon level mutant number 14 in front of him, Kaylan felt more and more that this possibility was not small. During the period called the Ice Age by the Hive civilization, Alpha Planet, there is a high probability that the surface of planet Alpha is not suitable for biological survival. Even if there are a few things like unkillable little strong that can survive in the extremely harsh environment, the biological diversity on the surface of Alpha Planet will not be very rich. 500,000 years seems like a long time, but for the process of biological evolution and differentiation, it is like a fleeting time. 500,000 years is simply not enough for those lower creatures to evolve into what Kaylan and the others see now. Appearance. Mass extinctions have also occurred on the Earth, but no matter what the cause of the mass extinction is, the interval between each mass extinction is measured in hundreds of millions of years, not hundreds of millions of years. It is impossible for a planet whose ecosystem has been completely destroyed to recover. The Hive City during the Ice Age was very similar to Noah's Ark. This does not refer to the interstellar colony ship built by the people on Earth, but the one mentioned in the Genesis chapter of the first volume of the Old Testament, Big Ship. In the story, God saw that mankind was full of evil and decided to use floods to completely wipe out mankind and cleanse the world. But there was a purely good man among mankind who received a warning from God before the flood came. God asked him to build a large ship, and he collected a male and female pair of each kind of bird and beast, and brought them together to this large ship called the Ark. Heavy rains and floods came as scheduled, and everything on the earth was destroyed. Only Noah's family and the animals on his ark survived. Although this is just a fabricated myth, similar floods have been recorded in the historical documents of different civilizations on the earth. This means that there has been a great flood of unprecedented scale on the earth. The prehistoric humans who survived the great flood passed these stories down orally, and gradually evolved into legends full of religious and mythological colors. The Ice Age may be another form of prehistoric flood. Putting aside what happened in the era of calamity and the era of silence, the development of the surface creatures on Alpha Planet into what they are now is most likely due to the various Earth creatures that were preserved in the Hive and their mutation body. Kaylan couldn't help but feel a little ironic when he thought that the ancestors of the indigenous creatures of Alpha Planet that were considered alien creatures by the scholars on the Ark were probably the creatures on Earth that were well known to humans. But this also explains well why the genetic sequences of the indigenous organisms on Alpha are extremely similar to those on Earth. The original academic explanation was that Alpha's landforms, atmospheric composition, gravity, and other environmental factors are close to those of the Earth, so Alpha only the indigenous creatures on the star have so many similarities with the creatures on Earth, but in fact, this explanation is very far-fetched. The evolutionary path of any kind of creature is unique. If you want to find another planet suitable for human habitation in the universe, it is already lower than the probability of winning the jackpot in the lottery, and the probability of this planet having creatures similar to the Earth is more equivalent to buying 100 lottery tickets in a row and winning the jackpot in 100 lottery tickets in a row. The only bug in this inference, or the problem that has not yet been solved, is the paradox in the timeline. This timeline does not refer to the timeline after the Ice Age. Everything that happened after that can be accounted for, but the only thing that cannot be explained is the group of humans who built the Hive before the Ice Age. How did you get to Alpha Planet? The wormhole. The problem must be the wormhole. Kaylan rubbed his chin. This was originally a habitual action of the old dog, but somehow it was transmitted to everyone in the hunting god hunting group. When Kaylan is thinking about some more complex issues, he also likes to rub the short and hard stubble with his fingertips. This meaningless action can temporarily relax his tense nerves. But this time he just put his hand up, and the smooth feeling on his chin interrupted his train of thought, making him stunned for a moment. Kaylan had not shaved since entering the grey mist forest. The fact that his chin is so smooth now is entirely thanks to that epsilon-level mutant. Most of K-Ian's current face is new growth. Naturally, there can be no stubble on the new skin. Where did I think just now? Oh yes, wormhole. Kaylan tried hard to pull back his wandering thoughts, excluding the existence that can only be described as God. In the known world, the only thing that can create a paradox between time and space is something like a wormhole, but even if you know that the problem lies in a wormhole, it is difficult to find further answers. Humanity's research on wormholes only ends at a very shallow level, and many things are still at the theoretical stage. In the academic field related to wormholes, new theories are proposed every year, and old theories are overturned. Scholars and experts are spitting out their opinions to those who disagree with them every day, but in K-Ian's view, not to mention most of the debates by these so-called professionals, it can be said that all of them are without any meaning. Paper talk based on facts. The reason is also very simple. Human beings currently cannot find a wormhole for observation and research. As for the Alpha civilization, the Hive civilization, and the civilization that built Yagonaktol, the civilization and the Hive civilization are probably the same branch, but Kaylan can't be sure yet, so they are divided. The transmission device left behind cannot even be dismantled, let alone studied. Some scholars once proposed to send a scientific expedition team to find the exit of the wormhole that the Ark passed through, but this whimsical plan immediately fell into disarray after it was proposed, and received almost no response. The probability of success of this plan is infinitely close to zero, and the consumption of resources is completely a bottomless pit. Even if the scientific expedition team can really find the wormhole, it will take hundreds or even thousands of years to complete a round trip. As for obtaining any substantial gains from this research, it is estimated that it will take another 1,000 years for mankind. This is like an investment project that requires astronomical amounts of money, but the return on investment is completely questionable, and the payback period is also horribly long. No one except scammers or people with other agendas will pay attention to such a project. For the leadership of ARK, the most important thing is to let humans gain a foothold on Alpha Planet, rather than doing such illusory things as exploring wormholes. The only real research data may be the files from the 499th year of the New Era, the year the Ark passed through the wormhole. Kaylan was suddenly startled when he thought of this. He had been to Blackwell, where hard drives containing various files were placed on the shelves classified by year. Only the files from the 499th year of the New Era disappeared. Not only is the hard drive that stored the files gone, but also the shelf that held the keyboard. Where the inscription New Era Year 499 is engraved is an open space, an extremely abrupt open space. It's like a wormhole hiding in the darkness of the universe, swallowing up all the light. Nothing can be observed. It's a pity that Kaylan was eager to search for information related to the 776th Special Forces team and did not give this matter a high priority. Coupled with a series of emergency incidents that occurred later, he no longer had the chance. The Departure Undead crew will investigate why this year's files disappeared. Maybe even the other members of the crew association don't know anything about it. The year 499 of the New Era is nearly 500 years ago. All the current members of the Immortal crew were not born in that year, and there was no existence in that period except for deep hibernation. Any technology that can significantly extend human lifespan. Kaylan, have you thought of a way to deal with this monster? 33 said from the side. He thought K-Ian's contemplative look was thinking about how to deal with this monster. This guy doesn't seem to be the best. We don't plan to give up our crouching, even if we choose to take a detour, it will probably follow us. I didn't think about it. Kaylan shook his head, and his thoughts spreading towards the distant stars were instantly brought back to reality. I was just thinking about other things. Something else. 33 was slightly startled. What's the matter? We'll talk about it later. Kaylan moved his newly grown limbs. Just now, I thought of a way to deal with this monster. You, come to my place wherever you find useful, remember to tell me in advance. 33 folded his hands in front of his chest. After being together for such a long time, he had gradually become accustomed to Ian's jumping but full of divergent thinking. To put it in layman's terms, it is difficult for ordinary people to follow his train of thought and match his radio waves. But because of this, Kaylan is often able to detect many deeper things hidden under the surface. This kind of thing may not directly help solve the immediate problem, but in the long run, it is of great significance. I'm thinking of something deeper. If I can't leave this place, I will be trapped to death. I am not the kind of saint with super high consciousness. If I hear the Tao in the morning, I will die at night. I can't do it. 33 said self-deprecatingly in his heart, while focusing all his attention on Kaylan, watching Kaylan walking step by step towards the monster inside the boundary line. Go. Be careful, don't force it. If it doesn't work, just go back. We have plenty of time, so there's no need to go all out. 33 said with some worry. Strongness can be overcome with softness. Have you ever heard of it? Kaylan flicked his arms, and the living armor condensed into a long cloth-like shape immediately wrapped around his arms, swinging gently in the air. It looked like, in fairy tales, those immortals are like automatic streamers without wind. Conquering strength with softness, of course I've heard of it. I am of Chinese origin after all. 33 said in astonishment, but, how do you plan to overcome it? Tai Chi? How can you use 4 ounces to lift 1,000 caddies? For many people, when it comes to using softness to overcome hardness, the first thing they think of is Tai Chi. Tai Chi can be said to be a model of using softness to overcome hardness in martial arts, but many people don't know that this concept actually originated from that kind of one-step training. Among street stall literature where you can buy a dozen copies, if someone really takes this seriously, they will definitely die miserably in actual combat. For example, a certain Tai Chi master claims to be a master of Tai Chi and can neutralize any enemy's attack. He has recruited a large number of disciples and even moved his gym from a small alley in the East 8th District to a prime location in the East 3 District. One day, 2 modified people with only 2 levels of enhancement came to kick me out. I was beaten to the ground and couldn't get up for a long time. The next day, I broadcast live and said that other people's bodies had been modified and they were not considered real natural persons. Simply do not talk about martial ethics. But only the martial arts practitioners of the practical school know that the training of martial arts is strength and speed. The so-called one force can break 10, the only martial arts in the world that cannot be broken is fast, boxing is afraid of young people, and so on. But after actual combat it is a proven and irrefutable truth that no matter how sophisticated the skills are, it is difficult to make up for the gap in strength, especially when fighting with bare hands. A martial arts master from the old era, even the master surnamed Ye who said I'm going to beat him 10 times, would have to be beaten to the ground by 2 fists when he met an enhanced person in this era. What Kaylan said about overcoming strength with softness has nothing to do with the so-called Tai Chi. He did not step into the border of the jungle, but stood on the edge of the border and threw the streamer turned into a living armor towards the monster. The streamer fell lightly, and the monster subconsciously used its tail to slap the streamer, but just when its tail was about to come into contact with the streamer instantly turned into liquid, and its tail was wrapped. Ian's idea is very simple. Since he can't touch him head-on, he might as well not touch him. After the living armor wrapped the monster's tail, it seeped in through the gaps in the scales, filling all the gaps between the scales. Immediately afterwards, the living armor suddenly hardened and began to expand, a breathtaking moment the sound of sour teeth came from under the monster's scales. The nano-alloy scales on the monster's body are very hard, but the connection between the scales and the body is not so indestructible. If the scales all over its body are integrated without any gaps, then Kaylan really has nothing to do with it, just like the black mummy on the plane, but the problem is that the monster itself will not be able to move. Everything has its weaknesses, it's just that Kaylan didn't discover its weaknesses just now. Kaylan grabbed the end of the ribbon and pulled hard. Suddenly, a large number of scales were torn off. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 918. The monster was in pain, and immediately jumped up from the ground, rolling sideways in mid-air, trying to tear off the streamer wrapped around its body. However, the flexibility of the living armor was far beyond its imagination. This rolling action not only did not tear off the ribbon, but instead wrapped it tightly around its body. More liquid seeped into the gaps between the scales, and more scales were torn off, revealing the bloody flesh underneath. 33 didn't even need to do anything. The sharp spikes formed by the living armor had already penetrated the monster's body. The monster's flesh was also quite tough. When he manipulated the spikes of the living armor to drill into the flesh, Kaylan felt something like the feeling of stabbing through dozens of layers of top-grade anti-stab clothing. Every step of penetration is extremely difficult. Even if the monster's meat is not poisonous, it may not be digested by the human stomach. Fortunately, it is much easier to control the force of the living armor than to stab it with a weapon. Kaylan only needs to give instructions to the living armor through his consciousness, without spending any effort at all. The monster was struggling wildly on the ground, but it couldn't get rid of its living armor like a gangrene attached to the bone. It dug out a huge pit on the ground, with gravel, soil, and torn vegetation scattered everywhere. It was everywhere, but even so, this monster did not cross the boundary of the jungle hunting ground and attack Kaylan's body, which was less than 3 meters away. The spikes condensed from the living armor finally entered the monster's internal organs. The moment he noticed that the resistance at the tip of the spikes was instantly reduced, Kaylan immediately made many small branches grow on the sides of the spikes. These bifurcations are like clusters of crystals in the mine, turning the monster's internal organs into a ball of rotten meat. No matter how hard the scales and bones are, and how tough the muscles and skin are, the internal organs are still fragile after all. After more than 10 minutes of dying struggle, the monster finally became silent and curled up motionless on its own surface. The bottom of the big pit comes out. Dead. 33 stepped forward and looked into the pit. The heart has stopped, and I have turned its brain into paste. If it is still alive, it only means that the Hive civilization's biochemical technology has reached its peak. Kaylan took back the living armor. I just said I also explored the internal structure of this monster. This guy has 4 hearts, 2 working at the same time and 2 in reserve. The brain capacity is about the same as that of a human being, and his IQ is probably not much lower. As for the visual organ, I really haven't found it yet. Then how did it see us? 33 was slightly startled and asked. You should rely on other senses. Kaylan kicked the broken soil on the edge of the pit. The broken soil mixed with gravel and rotten grass fell down along the wall of the pit and sprinkled on the monster's body. Asano Akira can't see either, but his ability to perceive the surrounding environment is better than anyone in the hunting group, except Ze Lugo. Ze Lugo. 33 muttered in a low voice. After he joined the hunting group, he gradually learned about Ze Lugo's origins through conversations with other people. Although other people in the hunting group were not aware of Ze Lugo's existence. We have become accustomed to it, but 33 always feels that we cannot look at Ze Lugo in the same way we look at ordinary people. This does not mean that he has a grudge against Ze Lugo, but in his opinion, Ze Lugo cannot be regarded as a human being at all, and at most it can only be regarded as an alien creature that maintains a friendly relationship with humans. But he also knew very well that in daily interactions, The other members of the hunting group treated Ze-Logo as their little sister. 33's emotional intelligence would not be so low that he would say Ze-Logo too are we considered human beings. Not only Ze-Logo, but Kaylan also gave him an unfathomable feeling, various abilities that were close to cheating, which should never appear in a human body. 33 originally thought that he was considered a monster for being able to control nano-alloy, but after joining the hunting god hunting group, he had a deep understanding of what it meant to be a little dwarfed by a big witch. Even without the help of someone like Ze-Logo, Kaylan still killed the unreasonably strong monster alone. If Kaylan wanted to kill him, it would have been a matter of a blink of an eye, right? Strangeness. Why do you have such thoughts? 33 scratched his neck irritably. Vaguely, he seemed to hear some voice whispering deep in his head, but when he wanted to listen carefully, the whisper disappeared without a trace. Kaylan, I said. 33 raised his head, but was stunned by the scene in front of him. Kaylan, who was standing there, disappeared, replaced by a large mass of rotten flesh and blood flowing with pus, and ugly tentacles covered with sharp teeth and eyeballs emerged from here. Every corner of the mass of flesh and blood came out, squirming and reaching towards him. 33 was so frightened that he jumped back a big step, but after he blinked hard, all the visions disappeared, including rotting flesh and blood, tentacles covered with sharp teeth and eyeballs. All were gone, and Kaylan still stood there, with his back to him, looking at the corpse of the monster at the bottom of the pit. What's going on? Kaylan turned around and looked at 33, obviously aware of 33's large jump just now. Ian's appearance has not changed at all, only some dried blood is still stained on his face, but for some reason, 33 always feels that the black and red blood is extremely bright, even coquettish. He always has a feeling, as if in the next second, this blood stain would spread quickly, covering Ian's entire body, turning into the flesh and blood monster he just saw. I just seemed to have seen a hallucination. 33 thought for a while and decided to tell Kaylan what he saw. You mean, you just saw me turn into a mass of flesh and blood monster covered with tentacles? And then in the blink of an eye, everything returned to normal. Kaylan stared into 33's eyes and confirmed with a serious look. Road. 33 nodded solemnly, but then shook his head slightly with a hint of hesitation. I can't be sure whether it was something I really saw or an illusion in my mind. He always felt that he seemed to have forgotten something. There was another thing he wanted to tell Kaylan, but now he couldn't remember it. It is not ruled out that it is an hallucination, but there is another possibility that your cognition has been interfered by some external force. Kaylan stretched out one of his arms, and the plasma-like living armor seeped out from the pores, covering the entire arm. All wrapped in it, the squirming, semi-liquid living armor simulated the shape and texture of rotten flesh and blood, and at the same time spawned several tentacles covered with thorns, swinging slightly. Is this scene very similar to what you saw? Kaylan asked. 33's breathing became a little faster. He nodded and said, absolutely, that's it. Perhaps it's because when I just used the living armor to attack the monster, it made you have some associations, and then some unknown force in the hive interfered with your consciousness, causing this association in your brain to be multiplied several times. Magnification, then creates that illusion. Kaylan thought. I don't know. 33's face was a little pale. To be honest, I'm worried that if I blink, you will turn into that kind of monster again in my eyes. Are you afraid of me? Kaylan was stunned for a moment and asked. No. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid of death, I'm just afraid of that kind of. 33 thought for a while, and then said word by word, afraid of that kind of, losing my companions. Moreover, compared to the death of my companions, I am more afraid of my companions turning into something that I cannot understand. Don't worry, even if I become a monster, I still consider myself a human being. Kaylan took back the living armor. If I find that my consciousness is about to lose control, I will choose to destroy my body before that. I would rather die than become his puppet, not to mention, My current mental state is very stable, and that day is still very early. On the contrary, it's you, Kaylan continued, I always feel that you are in a daze right now. Are you too tired? Tired, maybe. 33 took a deep breath and slowly exhaled it. After all, I haven't had a good rest along the way. No, Kaylan suddenly became excited and spoke faster. This has never happened before. Since you are seeing this kind of hallucination now, there must be a reason. Maybe we have already some kind of mechanism was triggered. Mechanism. After hearing this word, 33 subconsciously wanted to raise his head, but then he remembered the warning, don't raise your head. His whole body trembled violently, and he quickly lowered his gaze. These actions were naturally caught by Kaylan, who immediately asked, did you accidentally catch a glimpse of the dome above? Probably, no. 33 hesitated. I have always lowered my head, so I shouldn't have seen the dome. Only when I was in the jungle just now, I raised my head a few times to look for this one. Monsters moving among the giant trees, but the sky above the jungle is blocked by the huge and dense tree canopy, so the dome should not be visible. Kaylan looked back at the jungle behind him. He controlled the angle of his sight as much as possible so that he would not see the dome in the distance beyond the top of the tree canopy. Just as 33 described, the canopy is extremely dense. There are almost no gaps between the leaves, and even light cannot penetrate, let alone the human gaze that can penetrate the canopy and see the dome above. But at this moment, Ian's eyes were attracted by a small thing on 33, it was a rivet on the back of the backpack. Although the surface of the rivet had been frosted, it could still be seen vaguely. Seeing some reflected light, judging from the angle, those small turbid color patches projected on the rivets are exactly the dome above. Kaylan only felt as if a huge bomb exploded in his mind. A large number of messy and brilliant colors were mixed together, like an overturned paint shelf, and bright colored lights were intertwined. Fusion and entanglement with each other, new colors will be produced where the edges merge. In just 1 second, tens of thousands of colors are born. 1 second later, the camera zooms out instantly, forming a bright sea of stars. The colors just mixed, are they the Big Bang at the beginning of the universe? The sea of stars is still expanding. Although Kaylan can no longer see the colors clearly, he can clearly feel that the amount of information contained in the sea of stars is increasing geometrically, but the brilliant light produced by the explosions cools and condenses into shape. However, the celestial body does not exist just because it cannot be observed by Kaylan. If Ian's brain is compared to a computer, then this sea of stars is a real-time computing program. The foggy star clusters one after another are not maps, but a magnificent landscape composed of hundreds of millions of stars. Each star represents a huge amount of information, and the information contained in such a star cluster is enough to crash any of the most advanced personal computers on the Ark. Kaylan only felt that his head was really going to explode. He desperately summoned the last bit of consciousness, raised his hand, slapped himself hard, and took his eyes away from the rivet. Laugh. He seemed to hear the sound of a fire extinguishing, the color disappeared, the sea of stars and star clusters also disappeared, everything just now no longer existed, only the empty feeling in his head and the residual pain. There was so much for a few seconds. Kaylan even suffered from amnesia, he couldn't remember who he was, where he was, or what he was doing. He squatted on the ground, holding his knees with both hands, like an ostrich that buries its head in the sand when in danger, lowering its head deeply and breathing heavily. It wasn't until the buzzing in his ears disappeared that he heard 33 calling him urgently from the side. Kaylan? Kaylan? What's wrong with you? Can you hear me calling you? Hello? Hello? How can I help you? What do you want me to do? If you can't speak, at least give me some hints with your eyes. I'm fine. Kaylan waved his hand, at least I'm fine now. Kaylan calmed his breathing and stood up. He didn't dare to look with his eyes anymore, but reached out and touched his body, and soon he discovered that there were many similar rivets on his body. Since these rivets were not mirror metal, he did not initially think that they could reflect the scene of the dome, but only after experiencing it for himself would he know that all of these things were hidden in the body, traps. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 919. Just a casual glance would be enough, let alone Kaylan staring at it deliberately. Kaylan, what happened to you just now? 33 asked from the side. I accidentally saw the dome, Kaylan said. What? 33 froze in place, but you never raised your head. Listen to me first. Lower your head and stare at the ground. No matter what I say, don't move your eyes. Do you understand? Kaylan said. In the old era, there used to be a very famous little game in psychology and linguistics called Don't Think About the Elephant. The host of the game would give players some verbal prompts, such as don't think about it. An elephant. If the player subconsciously thinks of an elephant after hearing this sentence, then he loses. But in fact, when many people stress that their brains should not imagine something, the thing often appears in their minds uncontrollably. This is determined by human thinking patterns. Without special training, it is difficult for someone to truly control their thoughts. The reason why Kaylan asked Sanzanzan to stare at the ground first was because he was afraid that after he finished talking about rivets, Sanzanzan would subconsciously look at the rivets on his body. By the time he realized the problem, it would be too late. Understood. 33 obeyed obediently. It's a rivet. Rivet. 33 immediately held his breath. I know, you just. He habitually glanced at the rivets on his clothes, but fortunately Kaylan had warned him in advance, so he resisted the urge. You just saw the dome, what did you see? It's hard to describe. I saw the Big Bang, and the endless starry sky. I felt like a huge amount of information was pouring into my head, and it almost exploded, Kaylan said. What about now? Has there been any change in your body? 33 then asked. For example, it has been transformed into a corpse. It seems not. Kaylan shook his head. At least there is no visible mutation in the body. Oh, by the way, those hallucinations you just saw may also come from the dome reflected on the rivets, although I don't know what you saw, but there's a high probability that it's what you saw that changed your perception unintentionally. I haven't seen it. Well, does it count as an accidental glance? It doesn't matter. Fortunately, you only caught a glimpse. If you stared at it for a few seconds like I just did, there is a high probability that you won't be able to pull it back, Kaylan said as he took out something from his backpack. With a spray can used for marking, I searched for those places on my equipment that might be reflective, and sprayed them all with black paint. This kind of paint is specially made and can absorb most of the light and is covered by the paint. The covered area is like a black hole. No matter which angle you look at it, it is completely black, without even that matte luster. On the battlefield or in ruins, this kind of spray called black hole paint has completely opposite characteristics. It only needs to absorb a little light to release high brightness fluorescence for a long time. It has a very wide range of applications. The purpose, whether it is spraying signs, or used for camouflage, making bait, it is very useful. Except for the price, there are almost no disadvantages. Of course, the price cannot be regarded as a shortcoming of the product, but can only be regarded as a shortcoming of those who cannot afford it. Kaylan sprayed a layer of black hole paint on all the equipment on his body, and then threw the spray can to 33, use this thing to cover the reflection first. In addition, this matter can be considered as mentioned to me. Wake up. Later we must pay attention to all things that may produce reflections, such as mirrors, polished metal objects or even a puddle of water on the ground. The images reflected by these things are much clearer than frosted rivets. If there are more, the impact on us will definitely be stronger. It seems that the safest place on this floor is the forest in front of us, 33 said with a wry smile while spray painting. After all, the dome here is covered by the tree canopy. even if the ground is covered with mirrors, and we can't see anything. It's better to be careful. Kaylan exhaled a breath and rubbed his temples, which were still aching and swelling. Who knows whether the canopy will suddenly separate and catch us off guard. The two of them made some adjustments, and after making sure that there were no places on their bodies that would produce reflective images, they once again entered the jungle hunting ground. Although the route they took was exactly the same as the last time they came in, this time, the jungle was obviously a lot more lively. On the tree trunk at 3 o'clock, there is a large beetle that looks like a dung beetle. It is visually capable of flying. There are some sparsely divided purple-brown tiny spikes on the carapace, which should contain toxins. There are 10 more at 1 o'clock, hanging on a tree branch 3 meters above the ground, was a snake with an oval head, but I'm not sure whether the head shape of snake mutants can determine whether they are venomous. By the way, do you want to take action to eliminate these creatures? 33 asked. If they don't come to attack us, there is no need to actively provoke them. Kaylan responded, the levels of these creatures are not high. They are basically alpha level and beta level mutants. Their combat effectiveness is very weak. It is probably because after we killed that monster, they all poured into this new borderless land. I think so too. 33 nodded. When we came in for the first time just now, everything we could see was plants and not a single animal was seen. It seems that the crocodile-like monster should be regarded as the most powerful character in the jungle hunting ground, and its territory is really large enough, Kaylan said, but what I didn't expect is that the jungle there are actually so many weak creatures in the hunting ground. I originally thought that only the strong enough species could survive, and the weak species would soon be devoured. That's not necessarily the case. You know, cockroaches, commonly known as the invincible little strong, 33 said, it is said that they existed when the dominant creatures on the earth were still dinosaurs, and the creatures that ruled the earth changed. Another crop, but cockroaches have never been extinct from unknown prehistoric years to the end of the earth. Even after being brought to Alpha Planet by the Ark, they have multiplied and prospered on this planet again. Individually weak, does not mean that the ethnic group cannot continue. Kaylan didn't speak, he just turned his head, held up the flashlight in his hand, shined it on 33's face, and stared at him silently. 33 raised his palms to block the direct light from his eyes, and asked at the same time, "What's wrong? Are there bugs on my face?" "No, I'm just a little strange." "You wouldn't have said such things before," Kaylan whispered. "Such words? What kind of words?" 33 thought about it for a moment, and his face suddenly changed. "I thought it was nothing at first, but after you said that, I suddenly feel a little scared. Those words just now were indeed mine." "That's right, but you're right, according to my character and thoughts, it's impossible for me to say such things." 33 paused for a moment, and then slowly said, "It's just, as if there was a consciousness that borrowed my mouth to say these words." Kaylan did not answer, but continued to stare at 33, observing the changes in his expression. "Could it be a side effect of what happened just now?" 33 said worriedly. "Not only was my cognition affected, my thinking was also taken away by some unknown existence." "Already?" "Probably not." Kaylan shook his head. "Do you still remember what Nieto in the upper city told us before?" "What did you say?" 33 showed a trace of doubt on his face. "What she told you should be different from what she told me, right?" "It tells me that what is on the dome is the truth of the universe," Kaylan said. "That's why when I see the reflection on the rivets, I have images of the Big Bang and the endless sea of stars in my mind, and what you see might be something else. But I really can't remember what I saw. If I still remembered, my head would have exploded by now, right?" 33 subconsciously raised his hand to touch the back of his head, but it was okay not to touch it. His whole face changed when he touched it. Kaylan, there seems to be something growing on the back of my head. It is a bulge under the skin. It's moving." Kaylan felt his scalp explode and quickly walked around behind 33. Unlike many veterans who like to cut their hair short after retiring, San's hair is a little long and tied into a short ponytail at the bottom of the back of his head. Previously, Kaylan thought this was just San's personal hobby, but not long ago, 33 told him that this hairstyle was in memory of 2nd Lieutenant Tina Lawrence, who had died long ago. Kaylan took a deep breath, took out a pocket knife, opened the blade, cut San's hair tie, and then carefully parted his hair with the tip of the knife. Under the back of his head, there was a bulging, round sarcoma, about the size of a table tennis ball. The membrane on the surface of the sarcoma was very thin. Under the light of a flashlight, Kaylan could completely see what was inside the sarcoma. Got it crystal clear. An eyeball, Kaylan said, an eyeball that is completely covered by the membrane and has not yet opened. I have seen similar symptoms many times in mimetic infection incidents. Those who were infected by memes or animals, they will also develop large and small eyeballs. The initial stage of eyeballs is exactly the same as the thing on the back of your head. Then I was also infected by memes. 33's voice seemed a little dry. I don't know. Mere resemblance is not enough as a basis for judgment. Kaylan tried his best to keep his voice as calm as possible. Moreover, in that meme infection incident, the meme itself has been completely destroyed by me. Even if it infects you, it's a meme, and it's a new meme, not the original one. Could it be that the erosion degree of my body has begun to approach the critical point? 33 thought of another possibility. Just like Emoju, it won't take long for me to change. Have you become that kind of monster? I don't know. Kaylan still answered the same. The symptoms of cadaverization vary from person to person. You don't need to comfort me, really. 33 sighed, with a wry smile on his face. Actually, I have already made up my mind. When I come out this time, I know that it will be difficult for me to survive. I feel like it's a miracle to be back on the Ark and to be able to get here. I'm not comforting you, I'm just stating the facts. I know my own situation. You told me all those things. Before Hruni and the others turned into corpses, didn't they also mutate their bodies, hear all kinds of strange whispers, and see all kinds of strange sights? My current situation is alright. I think there won't be much time left for me, right? 33 said in a low voice. Kaylan didn't say anything. 33's analysis was indeed correct. His various symptoms were indeed consistent with the erosion level approaching the critical point. Can you help me cut off that thing? 33 suddenly asked. Even if I die, I will still look like a normal person. This neoplastic eyeball has a large number of blood vessels, which are directly connected to your brain. If it is removed directly, uncontrollable massive bleeding will occur, and there is a more than 90% chance that you will die directly. Cut it, 33 said without hesitation. What if there is a treatment? Kaylan let down San's hair. Hruni persisted for so long before the erosion reached the critical point. Maybe you can persist longer than him. My intuition tell me, the solution to the decay of corpses should be hidden in this hive. If it's not in the hive, then it must be in the Tower of Babel. Aren't you trying to comfort me? No, my intuition has always been accurate. P.S. Sorry for the late update today. My teeth have been hurting so much that I am a little distracted. Also, I want to ask, are there any readers who know dentistry? I have a back molar. There was a hole in it due to dental caries about 10 years ago. I must have had root canal treatment, I can't remember exactly, and then the hole was sealed with a filling. The result was the same. The outer filling fell off after more than a year, and because the tooth no longer hurt, I left it alone. I haven't had any pain in more than 10 years. It turns out that just over a month ago, the thing that was originally used to fill the root canal was pulled out while I was brushing my teeth. Recently, the tooth has been starting to hurt again. This is because dirt has entered the root canal, causing infection and inflammation. Yet, you are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 920. Why resist him? Nieto's voice, which had been silent for a long time, sounded again. You have seen it just now, right? The universe, not the truth of this world. I saw your mother died. Kaylan exhaled sweetly. Although Nieto's voice still had the same calm tone, Kaylan could hear a trace of undisguised pride in it. There was no doubt that although Nieto could not do anything substantive to Kaylan and the others, although it interferes, it can always monitor what they are doing. Kaylan and 33 accidentally fell into the trap. This is undoubtedly the scene it wants to see the most. Your insults are meaningless, they are just human incompetence and rage, Nieto said. You just saw the bright starry sky, didn't you? It can know what it sees, Kaylan thought, but this does not mean that the thing on the dome must be what it sees. That thing varies from person to person, just like between myself and 33 will hear different sounds. What he saw was the starry sky, but what 33 saw might be twisted limbs and rotting flesh. Such a beautiful thing, countless stars, each with the possibility of giving birth to life. Compared with them, don't you think the human world is narrow and small? Kaylan didn't want to pay attention to Nieto at all. Even if this guy had an eloquent tongue and described the so-called truth in eccentric ways, but as someone who had witnessed the truth with his own eyes, Kaylan would never believe what he said. Half a word. Kaylan had seen with his own eyes the flesh and tentacles, the madness, despair and sinking, the changes in the body, the collapse of consciousness, the annihilation of personality. He would never think that human beings turned into that kind of thing called corrosion. The monster is the one who says he gives believers a bright future. This thing is essentially the same as any cult in the old era. The latter makes you donate your money and life, while the former devours your body and soul. The so-called preaching is just a means to achieve the goal, and as for the believers, it is a resource like firewood. The firewood burns itself, absorbs heat, and eventually turns into ashes. Don't you think that humans are ignorant and hopeless creatures? Nieto said again. Never thought so. Think about it, what does the development of human history and technology rely on? The wisdom of laborers and the talented and chosen sons complement each other and are indispensable. Kaylan replied casually. You think human beings are hopelessly ignorant, but in my opinion, every moment in human history, every page is filled with stars shining brightly. Totally wrong, Nieto retorted. What drives human history and technological development is war. War. Kaylan was slightly startled. He realized that what the other party said seemed to be true. The first field where any emerging technology was applied must be military. This was true 5,000 years ago, and it will be true 5,000 years later. War is just a catalyst. Whether there is war or not, human science and technology will develop, just like living things will inevitably evolve with changes in the environment. As long as humans have a thirst for knowledge about the unknown, exploration and progress will not stop. So, in human society, how many such pure people are there who have sacrificed everything to explore the unknown? Nieto suddenly laughed. Take the Earth in the old era in your memory as an example. Biotechnology companies invested a lot of money. The purpose of using manpower and material resources to engage in scientific research is to develop new drugs and gather more wealth. The space programs of various countries have launched so many satellites and spacecrafts just to find more resources and waste these resources on meaningless things. Even you relic hunters, who are desperately exploring the relics of Alpha civilization, are not doing it for money. You are changing the concept secretly. I don't think I need to argue with you at all, Kaylan said disdainfully. You really don't need to argue with me, because you know better than me. Nieto spoke faster and faster. In peacetime, where do most of the resources in human society go? Do you know? Researching and developing a new anti-tumor drug requires hundreds of millions of funds, and the value of those meaningless luxury brands is often several times or even dozens of times that amount. This kind of thing has value. Is it? The industry is weakening, People are impetuous, those who are down to earth have little income, and the financial industry is constantly expanding like a huge bubble. Numbers without meaning and actual value are flowing in the virtual market. Human beings in the 21st century are hollowed out. More than 70% of the Earth's resources cannot even get out of the solar system. Do you think a civilization like this has the value of existing? Even when it comes to life and death, the vast majority of people still choose to go with the flow. What's more, the ugliness of human nature is clearly exposed. When Noah's Ark was being built, construction bases around the world suffered a total of in case of 1,655 terrorist attacks. The attacker's reason is simple: since he cannot be selected as a crew member of the Ark, he does not want to see anyone able to escape the solar system, but he can only stay on the Earth and wait. Nieto continued. Even if you belittle humanity so much, the Ark still successfully set sail, and we still arrived here. Kaylan sneered. I'm just curious, where did you get these data? Obviously, it shouldn't come from my memory, because even I can't remember how many times Ark's construction base has been attacked. So, does the Hive civilization really originate from the Earth? From a lucky engineering ship? Aren't you obsessed with the endless starry sky? Nieto suddenly changed the subject. That feeling of swelling and pain in your head just now, is it uncomfortable? It's really uncomfortable, so no matter what you say, I will never raise my head to look at that damn dome again, Kaylan said. But as long as you become one with him, your thinking tentacles can extend to every star in the endless sea of stars. Those huge information flows are nothing to him who is omniscient and omnipotent, and as a part of him, you can also have a panoramic view of every corner of this universe. You can instantly understand problems that humans have been unable to solve for thousands of years. You can gain power that has not been possible for hundreds of millions of years of biological evolution. You can even create a brand new planet. Create a brand new species. Even if it's a pyramid scheme, when it comes to making a pie for the deceived, the promises must be realistic. You've been saying this for a long time, but nothing is convincing. Is it useful? Kaylan waved his hand. Let me give you a suggestion. Assuming that your body is still in its original position, you'd better think about whether there is any information that can interest us in exchange for your life. Otherwise, when I find you, I'll blow you up with one punch. You will change your mind. Nieto's voice became obviously deeper. Kaylan just wanted to deny it, but found that the surrounding scene suddenly changed. The jungle and 33 disappeared, replaced by a bustling street, and the flow of people pushed him forward involuntarily. Hallucination. P.S. Thanks to the fake soul flower for the 1,500 starting coins. P.P.S. The stack of double debuffs for Cavangia's toothache is full. I really can't type at night. There should be another update during the day. Alien Relic Hunter author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 921. Kaylan subconsciously looked at the appearance and clothing of the people around him. The hair colors of this group of people are mainly brown and blonde, their facial features are three-dimensional, their skin is fair, and most of their pupils are green or blue. This is obviously a characteristic of the typical Mediterranean European race. But among the crowd, there are also some people whose skin color is yellowish or even close to brown. These people's facial features are softer, and their hair color is basically black or close to black. The appearance of these people is more special, and their bloodline, it seems that they are not pure. According to K. Ian's knowledge, this kind of people are often the product of national integration. Generally speaking, in ancient times, such mixed-race descendants tended to have lower social status, but here, they are not much different from those Europeans, and even the clothes and jewelry worn by some mixed-race ethnic groups are significantly higher than the vast majority of Europeans. First of all, it can be determined that the location in the hallucination is in a large city in Europe. This big city has a relatively advanced social concept and does not discriminate against certain people because of their blood and ethnicity. There has been this kind of multi-ethnic mixing in history. Big city. Kaylan shifted his attention from their appearance to their clothes. Most of these people were wearing cotton or linen burqas. There were white robes inside the burqas. The collars, cuffs, and hems of the burqas had complicated patterns. Gorgeous patterns. The main body of the burqa is relatively simple, usually with a large diamond-shaped grid or dots of small embroidery. Many people also have equally gorgeously decorated swords on their waists. A few people still wear silk clothes. Many people think that this precious fabric can only be produced in the mysterious country in the East in ancient times, but in fact, as early as the 5th century AD, Westerners have mastered silkworm rearing and reeling. Silk technology. Silk has gradually become popular in the Western world. Renaissance, Roman, attire. Kaylan quickly found a matching style in his memory. Have I traveled to Renaissance Rome? Speaking of which, Rome is indeed a place where multi-ethnic cultures and bloodlines blend, which is completely in line with Ian's first impression of the people on the street. These people seemed to be rushing towards one place, and the crowds were crowded together. Even Kaylan couldn't help but walk forward. He found that his power had dissipated, and now he was just an ordinary person. The young man wore a plaid burqa that was not much different from those around him, and had a sheathed dagger as long as his forearm stuck at his waist. "Excuse me, where are you going?" Kaylan patted the shoulder of an old man with gray hair next to him. The latter turned his head and asked with some confusion, "What did you say?" Kaylan spoke in Chinese, and the other party's answer was also in Chinese, not Latin, which the Romans should speak. It's not that the other party couldn't understand what Kaylan said, but it was because the surrounding environment was too noisy that he didn't hear it clearly. Kaylan came closer and repeated the question in a louder voice, "Excuse me, where are these people going?" "You don't know." The puzzlement on the old man's face became even more serious, and there was even a hint of surprise. "Flower Plaza. Campo de Fiori? Rome's Campo de Fiori?" As soon as he heard this place name, a person's name that was inseparable from this place immediately appeared in Ian's mind. Immediately afterwards, the old man said the name that came to Ian's mind. "Don't you know that according to the Holy See's announcement, today is the day to burn that heretic Bruno to death?" Bruno, Giordano Bruno. Bruno, who firmly believed in and vigorously promoted Copernicus's heliocentric theory, was eventually sentenced as a heretic by the Inquisition and burned alive at the stake. Kaylan suddenly understood why Nieto would immerse himself in such a fantasy. Bruno is going to be burned to death today. Is it because he promotes the heliocentric theory that is contrary to the Church's philosophy? Kaylan murmured to himself. For some reason, the old man who originally had to strain his throat to hear him actually heard what he was talking to himself. The surprise on his face turned into horror, and he kept saying, "You can't say this casually. You know, only the earth created by God is the center of the universe, and what that heresy preaches is simply fallacies. The heliocentric theory is indeed wrong, but at least." Kaylan originally wanted to say that at least this theory is an improvement compared to the geocentric theory, but then he thought about it and argued with the people in these illusions. What's the point? In the end, I chose to remain silent. This is just a replay of a historical scene. Kaylan knows that no matter what he does in this illusion, it has no meaning. He is not a member of this world, just an audience in it. People quickly poured into a square, where a 4-meter-high platform was erected. A man in shabby clothes and covered with injuries was tied weakly to a pillar made of rough logs. The hemp rope rubbed his wrist until it was bloody, even revealing the white bone stubble. "Burn him to death! Burn him to death!" a group of people closest to the burning platform shouted loudly. The sound soon swept through the entire flower square. Many people, including the old man next to Kaylan, were shouting with, "Burn him! Burn him!" A cardinal wearing a robe and a tall hat walked forward, looked at Bruno, and said, "As long as you are willing to admit that the heliocentric theory is wrong and you have been tempted by heretics, we will put you down immediately. You will not have to die, and you will be able to bask in the light of the Lord again." Bruno did not raise his head. He was too weak. After nearly half a minute, he gasped and said intermittently, "The sun is the center of the universe, the sun is heretic. Burn him to death." When the people who were closer to the burning platform heard Bruno's words, they suddenly burst into great anger and fear. They waved their arms, as if they wished they could rush to the burning platform and snatch the executioner aside. The torch in his hand lit the dry wood piled at Bruno's feet. "The sun is the center of the universe, this is the truth." Bruno seemed to have exhausted all his strength and shouted to the people in the audience. What responded to him were the angry shouts of the people. Kaylan noticed that not everyone was shouting "burn him to death." A few, like him, remained silent, standing in the crowd, silently staring at Bruno. Although the heliocentric theory is considered a heresy, many people still accept it. But at this time, no one was willing to stand up and stand on Bruno's side. P.S. Thanks to Jason for the 15,000 book coins for the reward. Well, I also want to emphasize again that if you want to reward, try to choose the Kidian app Android client, or the PC web page. The author's share is 50%, if it is on other platforms, channels, or iOS systems, the proportion of the money given by everyone to the author will be very small, and there will be a delay of several months. Suppose you use the iOS system to reward 100 yuan on a third-party channel. In the end, the author will not get even 20 yuan, and it will be delayed for several months. As for some more biased channels, the readers, you don't get a penny to reward the author. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Enchenmi-san. Chapter 922. Just when Kaylan thought that Bruno would be burned at the stake soon, a scene that was not recorded in historical documents took place in front of the square. A group of fanatical believers with crosses hanging around their necks led two men with disheveled hair to the stake. One of these two people looked to be about 30 years old, and he should be an ordinary vendor by his appearance. The identity of the other older person surprised Kaylan. Through the whispers of the people around him, Kaylan only then did I realize that this bald middle-aged man was actually a lecturer at a church school. Being a lecturer in a church school is actually just a part-time job. Anyone who can hold this part-time job must be a member of the church, and the man who is being burned at the stake is actually a well-known priest. Is this a traitor in the church? This seemingly unexpected farce seemed to have been arranged by the church. The cardinal who presided over the execution ceremony nodded kindly to the group of fanatical believers, and then began to read out the crimes of the two men to the crowd. The merchant's crime was to sell a series of banned books including the theory of the movement of celestial bodies, while the priest spread the theory of heliocentrism for Bruno in the church school. "Burn them to death! Burn them all to death!" the people began to shout again. "Archbishop! I don't know that what this heretic gave me to sell was those banned books," the vendor immediately cried. "I thought they were just some ordinary reading materials, and I was deceived by him. If I knew if those were banned books, I would have reported them to the church long ago." "It doesn't matter." There was a kind smile on the cardinal's face. He waved to the believers who were escorting the vendors to move away. He walked forward and stroked the vendors' foreheads. "The Lord will grant every one of his people the right to change. The chance to make a new comeback is all you need to do. One very simple thing." A believer placed a package in front of the vendor. The package was opened, and inside were several long nails as thick as fingers and a small hammer. The cardinal still kept a smile on his face and said, "As long as you nail the heretic's hands and feet to the stake, the Lord can forgive your sins." Kaylan in the audience couldn't help but twitch after hearing these words. He originally thought that the vendor would hesitate, but he didn't expect that the vendor actually picked up the spike and hammer without hesitation. Gratefully nodded to the cardinal, "I will do it. I will do it." He walked up to Bruno with a spike and a hammer. Due to the angle, Kaylan could not clearly see the merchant's expression at this time, and Bruno's head was always drooping, as if he was deaf to what was happening on the burning platform. The merchant walked behind Bruno and put the long nail into Bruno's palm. At the moment when the hammer was about to hit, his movements finally paused for a moment. But it was only a moment's pause. The hammer finally fell down and hit the tail of the spike. The long nail penetrated Bruno's palm and was driven into the torture chamber. Bruno's shoulder only twitched slightly. He was so weak that he couldn't even scream. It wasn't until 4 long nails were nailed to his hands and feet that the cardinal said to the vendor, "My child, you have redeemed your sins, you can go down." Praise the great Lord. The merchant's lips trembled and his face was extremely pale. I don't know whether it was because the bloody act just now gave him too much stimulation, or because of the residual tension after surviving the disaster and saving his life. When he stepped off the burning platform, he tripped twice in a row, causing a burst of deep laughter in the crowd. "Bruno, you have one last chance to repent." The cardinal turned around and said to Bruno, who was already dying. Blood flowed out from his palms and soles, and flowed along the rusty spikes to the torch, and then was absorbed by the wood fibers, showing a dark brown mark. Bruno lowered his head and said in an imperceptible voice, "I am dedicated to the truth, and will not give in, compromise." The kind smile on the cardinal's face froze for a moment. He frowned, looked at Bruno up and down unhappily, and then motioned to the congregants to bring over the priest who preached heresies. "Father Charles, why did you fall to associate with heretics?" the cardinal said to the priest, his eyes full of sorrow. "You should have been the Lord's agent in the world, spreading his message to the Lord. Gospel, but look what you have done now." I. The priest named Charles thought for a long time and then said, I was deceived by the devil, that was not my intention. I am willing to dedicate everything to the Lord. I hope that the bishop, sir, I hope the Lord can give me a chance to atone for my sins." "Of course. The Lord is merciful. Everyone has a chance to atone for their sins, even heretics." The cardinal glanced at the person who was tied up with the corner of his eye. "No, he should be nailed to the stake now." Bruno meant something, it's just that the heretics are stubborn, and even the Lord can only choose to purify them. "Please, ask me to purify this heretic for the Lord." Father Charles thought for a while and said with some difficulty, "Of course, this is your road to salvation, Charles." The cardinal smiled happily, and an executioner wearing a white pointed hat handed a blazing torch to Father Charles. Charles took the torch and walked to the place of execution with some trembling. Bruno's chest rose and fell twice. He seemed to want to raise his head and look at the person standing in front of him, but he failed in the end, perhaps because of his status as audience. The voice that only Father Charles could hear originally, Kaylan could hear it clearly even from the crowd dozens of meters away from the burning platform. "Charles, my friend, is it you?" Bruno asked weakly. No, please don't call me that. I'm not your friend." Charles responded, "You are just a damn heretic, and I was deceived by you. I will. Tisk." Bruno didn't speak anymore, he just let out a contemptuous sneer, and a piece of clot of blood spurted out from his nose and fell to the ground. "Here, heretic Bruno, as long as you admit now that what you preach is wrong, you will not be burned to death." Father Charles lowered his voice, "This is really the last chance. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Enchenmi-san. Chapter 923. Why are you so stubborn? Father Charles looked at his former friend, with a trace of unbearability finally showing in his eyes. Because. Bruno wanted to say something more, but the remaining strength was no longer enough to support him to utter a complete sentence. At this moment, the cardinal walked up silently, put his hand on Father Charles's shoulder, and said in a voice that only Father Charles and Bruno could hear, "The Lord once gave him salvation. He himself gave up the opportunity, and gave up many times. Now, this heretic is about to die. If you light the pyre after his death, it will be a little difficult to atone for the sins you have carried already. Ah, Father Charles's pupils suddenly trembled, and he almost lost his grip on the torch and dropped it. But in the next second, he would rather wish that he had failed to hold the torch firmly and lit the pyre just like that. Maybe he would not have to face the inner struggle that followed. I will purify this heretic. Father Charles took a deep breath, and finally put the torch to the pyre at Bruno's feet. Boom! A stone flew out of the crowd and accurately hit the torch in Father Charles's hand. The torch immediately flew out and fell into the crowd, causing a brief commotion. Kaylan finally rushed to the burning platform and kicked over 2 congregants who came to stop him. He knew very well that in the fantasy world, no matter what he did, it was meaningless, but it was still a good place to vent his emotions. Anyway, everything was virtual, just like when he was in a bad mood before, he would choose some violent and bloody game to decompress. For some reason, looking at the kind but weak smile on the face of the cardinal in front of him, what came to Ian's mind was Nieto's expressionless face. He punched the cardinal without even thinking. On the cardinal's nose. The cardinal leaned back in an instant, and bursts of exclamations broke out around him. Dozens of believers with weapons rushed to the burning platform and surrounded Kaylan. I've played so many games, and this is the first time I played the plot of Tribulation Field, and it's a completely immersive experience. It's really good. He licked his dry lips, bent down and picked up a stick scattered on the ground. He picked up some firewood, then found a random direction and rushed over. 2 congregants dressed in white and holding sticks rushed towards Kaylan, but their attacks were dodged by Kaylan. The next second, dry firewood covered with thorns was slapped on their faces. 2 bright red blood stains were drawn out. Although Ian's power became the same as that of ordinary people in the illusion, his fighting skills were retained. He had no pressure when 4 or 5 believers besieged him at the same time. Instead, these believers were beaten by him and screamed again and again. The dry firewood was quickly cut off, and Kaylan simply pulled out the dagger hanging on his waist, and stabbed 3 congregants who also drew their swords in 3 strokes. In a virtual fantasy world, killing people will not have any psychological burden. If possible, Kaylan would even want to kill everyone in the flower square. But as soon as this idea appeared, he was frightened by himself. Wasn't Nieto choosing to let him enter such an illusion just to make him have such thoughts? This is the purpose of the other party. After thinking about this, Kaylan, who was still waving the dagger, stopped and stood there, but at some point, all the surrounding believers had fallen, and the originally crowded flower square became empty. The burning sensation and the smell of smoke came from behind. Kaylan turned his head and saw that the fire torture room was already burning. Bruno's body gradually turned into a dark skeleton in the fire. You can't change anything, but that's not important. What's important is that farces like this have been staged countless times in human history, the skeleton in the fire said. No, I'm just curious about one thing. Since you can let me fall into this illusion, why don't you just show the things on the dome in the illusion? That is a miracle that belongs to him, and no one can simulate it. Nieto said, and you should also know that the materials that make up these illusions are all derived from a part of your memory that is not in your memory. Things, I can't let them appear in this illusion. Yes, I noticed it. Kaylan nodded. The cardinal's face was a combination of many people Kaylan knew. As for Bruno, his face came from an article Kaylan had read. Documents about the heliocentric theory, but the portrait of Bruno in that document came from the creations of later artists. Bruno in reality would definitely not look like this. At least it won't be exactly the same. Although the illusion is false, this history is real. If you feel that this history is too far away from you, why not try this one instead? Are you done? Before Kaylan could finish his complaint, the surrounding scene changed again. This time, the surrounding scene suddenly became modern. This was a factory built on an open plain, with 8 huge factories in a circle. In the middle of the factory was a large square made of steel beams and lightweight polymers. The shed made of planks is more than 300 meters high and covers an area as large as hundreds of football fields. Countless workers, transport vehicles, and construction equipment are shuttling back and forth under the shed. A huge piece of equipment in the assembly stage is located in the center, surrounded by hundreds of brackets and robotic arms. Although this is still, it was just a frame, but Kaylan could still tell at a glance that it was a modular power block on Noah's Ark. Although the main body of Noah's Ark was built in the universe, due to time constraints, many equipment could not be transported to space. Some parts such as power blocks and electronic equipment that require relatively high processing conditions were assembled on Earth. Completed, then packaged, and sent to the sky by rocket or space shuttle. This place is obviously also a factory used to produce such parts. Kaylan took a look at his attire. He changed from the clothes of the Roman people during the Renaissance to a dark blue overalls. There was also a work hat on his head. The work hat was written in both Chinese and English. Written by, the 9th team of the 4th factory, safety manager, Kaylan. Hanging on K-Ian's waist is a folding submachine gun. The safety manager is not responsible for the production safety of the factory, but for the safety of the factory and the workers. Before Kaylan could get familiar with the surrounding environment, a sudden explosion sounded in one of the 8 huge factories. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 924. Not sure if it was because the character setting would have certain psychological implications for Kaylan, or if seeing the Ark under construction would give him an inexplicable sense of familiarity, Kaylan subconsciously picked up the folding submachine gun hanging on his waist. But just when he was about to walk towards the factory where the explosion occurred, a colleague on the side put his hand on his shoulder and pulled him. The accident happened in the 2nd factory and is not within our scope of responsibility. Although the colleague had loaded his submachine gun, he had no intention of moving. Kaylan looked into the distance and saw that the security personnel in dark blue overalls were stationary at their original posts. Only a group of soldiers in sand-colored combat uniforms and firefighters in orange uniforms were heading towards the 2nd run in the direction of the factory. If everyone rushes there at once, other places will be undefended. The colleague who looked not too young explained to Kaylan in a deep voice, what if the explosion was just caused by the attacker? If you are a bait, you should stick to your position. He paused and then said, as long as nothing happens to the central workshop, any loss will be within the tolerable range. As if to verify what he said, within a few seconds, sporadic gunshots were heard from the direction of the number 1, number 5, and number 7 factories. On the contrary, the thick smoke above the number 2 factory where the explosion occurred gradually it went out, and it seemed that the situation was under control. Look, I knew it. The man shrugged rather proudly, took out a box of cigarettes from his pocket, popped one out very skillfully, held it in his mouth and lit it, and then handed the box to Kaylan. Asked in a nasal voice, "Here, would you like one?" "No, thank you, I don't smoke." Kaylan waved her hand and declined, then looked back at the 4th factory behind her. The door of the factory was closed, and only a small door connected to the assembly line conveyor belt was open. Every few minutes, a sealed metal cabinet will be sent out from the small door on a conveyor belt, and then it will be loaded onto a trolley by the staff waiting at the door and transported to the central workshop under the giant shed. Although the fire in the 2nd factory has not been completely extinguished, and although gunfire still rang out in several other factories, except for the persons in charge of those factories and the mobile troops waiting nearby, no one left their posts without permission. The factories are still operating in an orderly manner, and everyone is playing their role step by step like a part on the machine, completely turning a blind eye to the emergencies that are happening close at hand. I've seen this kind of thing too many times. My colleague took a puff of cigarette and said, when this big project just started, I worked as a guard in the factory in North Africa. In the first month, the factory was attacked more than a dozen times, on average once every 2 or 3 days, and at most there were 3 or 4 attacks a day. In the first month, everyone was so exhausted that they even had to attack during breaks. With the loaded gun under my head, I couldn't sleep peacefully. In the second month, although the situation still did not improve, we became much more comfortable in handling it. Half a year later, this kind of thing has become more difficult for us. It's no different than eating and drinking. Judging from your nervous look, you were assigned here just after completing the training, right? Yeah. Kaylan laughed and asked, who are the people who attacked? Although this illusion was created by Nieto, Kaylan was indeed very interested in this period of history. Since he couldn't go out for a while now, he might as well try his best to see if he could dig it out of Nieto's illusion. Some valuable information to come. Who knows, there are all kinds of people, KB elements, religious figures, bewitched students, etc. Even some homeless people who are desperate for life will be taken advantage of and run outside the factory walls. Throw Molotov cocktails filled with denatured alcohol or gasoline into the wall. Is the defense around the factory so weak? Can even homeless people get close to the wall? Kaylan was stunned for a moment. I think our factory is surrounded by minefield warning signs. It is said to be a minefield, but only some non-lethal electric shock traps are set up. The density is still very low. If you want to, you can even pass through the minefield with your eyes closed. I can guarantee that there are 8 out of 10 chances. 9. You won't step on any traps. How so? Time is tight. Do you know how many days it took to build this factory and put it into use? How many days? Less than a week. The colleague took another long puff of cigarette and pointed to the top of his head while puffing away the smoke. The people in the sky are working hard. Factories all over the world are working overtime. In addition to the big ship, there is also the Stargate used to accelerate the big ship, which is also a big project. The big ship the other party mentioned was naturally referring to Noah's Ark. Speaking of which, I don't really understand the brain circuits of those people. It's obviously still hundreds of years before the sun swallows the earth, and they won't live until that time, so why bother risking their lives? This colleague of Kaylan seemed to be very addicted to cigarettes. He just finished smoking one and took out another one to light up. Hundreds of years. As a resident of the New Age of Ark who lived more than 1,000 years later, Kaylan naturally knew that this was just a lie to stabilize people's hearts, but in a sense, it was not a lie. The aging and expanding sun was indeed. It will take hundreds of years for it to be swallowed up by the earth, but before it is swallowed up, the rising temperature will be enough to end all life on the earth. According to estimates from later generations, after the Ark set sail, the time left for people on the earth would not exceed 30 years at most. Moreover, within 10 years, the average temperature on the Earth's surface will rise to 40 to 50 degrees Celsius, and this number will double in 3 years. By that time, all humans left on the Earth will have to move underground. Living in a shelter, the surface will no longer be suitable for any living creature to survive. In the 25th year, the Earth will be ignited, and in the 30th year, the entire Earth's crust will be burned through, and everything in the shelter will be reduced to ashes. The reason why the Ark construction plan is so urgent is precisely because the leaders of various countries know that there is not much time left for mankind and the Earth. In fact, the propaganda of those radical organizations that opposed the Ark project was actually true. In that era, the vast majority of young people could witness with their own eyes the day when the Earth was engulfed in flames. If the destruction of the Earth really has to wait until hundreds of years later, the resistance movements around the world will definitely not be so active. After all, many people have the mentality of "I won't care about the flood after I die." But the problem is that this flood will come soon, and the vast majority of people on the Earth will not be able to get the ticket to board the Ark. There is never any fairness in reality. The so-called everyone is equal promoted in peaceful times is itself a beautiful lie, not to mention that all mankind has reached a moment of life and death. Everyone knows this kind of thing, but not everyone can accepting this reality. They will only complain about why they cannot board the Ark, why some people can escape from this planet that is about to be destroyed, but they can only stay and wait to die. Coupled with the fact that the end is approaching, the fear of death gradually turns into madness, and the frequent occurrence of riots is naturally not difficult to explain. Suppose the authoritative media announces that the end of the world will come in a few days. After the initial doubts, the entire society will be plunged into chaos. Those literary and artistic works describe the last days to make up for life regrets and leave precious memories. The beautiful stories are all lies. Only a chaotic world, broken order and burning, killing and looting everywhere are what the end of the world should look like. When the shadow of death falls on people, when laws and morals lose their binding force, the evil in human hearts will be stimulated to the greatest extent. Look, you have to admit this, human nature is inherently evil. Nieto's voice suddenly sounded in Ian's mind. The lives of the vast majority of individuals are worthless, except for the life of the entire ethnic group. They can't do anything but hold them back. Either turn off this boring fantasy for me, or shut up. It's your choice, Kaylan said impatiently. Nieto did not continue speaking and chose silence. Obviously, it is not in a hurry to convince Kaylan, or maybe it wants to use the illusion to trap Kaylan. Kaylan didn't know if time in the real world was synchronized with the fantasy world at this time, and he wasn't sure what his situation was like in the real world. If this fantasy world was similar to a dream, he didn't know if 33 was still awake. You know, the two of them are now in a jungle hunting ground. Although the overlord of this area has been killed by Kaylan, if it takes a long time, after the mutant crocodile's aura dissipates, other high-level mutants who want to expand their territory will naturally invade here. If people are in an unconscious state, the situation will not be good. This illusion must be broken as soon as possible, but the question is, where should we start? In the last environment of Place of Flowers in Rome, Kaylan tried to use violence to break the situation, but it turned out that it had no effect at all. The fantasy was completely pieced together from the materials in his own memory. No matter what happened in the fantasy, no matter how unreasonable things are, as long as it does not exceed the limit of Ian's imagination, the illusion can continue to operate. Even if a scene of Ultraman vs. Transformers were staged on the battlefield of World War II, it would not have any impact on the fantasy world. Only Kaylan would find it outrageous, and everyone else in the fantasy world would think it was outrageous. Normal things, or simply turn a blind eye. For example, Kaylan was talking to Nieto just now. His volume was enough for the colleague standing next to him to hear, but the other party didn't pay attention to Ian's self-talk at all. Ian's current situation is like being trapped in an extremely real nightmare. He clearly knows that this is a dream, but he cannot wake up from the dream. As for how Nieto controlled his brain to produce this illusion, it probably had something to do with the fact that he accidentally caught a glimpse of the starry sky just now. Otherwise, Nieto would have been there when Kaylan and 33 first entered the upper city. You can use this trick, there is no need to wait until now. The dome scene seen through the rivet was a fatal flaw. Nieto must have seized this opportunity to create these illusions one after another. A similar situation occurred once in the bottomless sinkhole. That time, the solution was solved by an email from the intelligence dealer. Although Kaylan didn't know how the intelligence dealer managed to send the email to Dreamland, Kaylan also checked his mobile phone and mailbox afterwards, but found no trace of this email. When he mentioned this matter to the intelligence dealer in a vague way, the other party also seemed completely unaware. But later, after Kaylan learned that the intelligence dealer and the undead crew were inextricably linked, he was basically certain that the email was definitely a kind of help from the outside world. As for how the intelligence dealer did it, then it's unknown. The real name of the intelligence dealer is Li Hao, but the registrant of the ICMS 0420 ID is just Li Hao. Moreover, according to the investigation of the undead crew, This Li Hao died accidentally a year before the Battle of the Ancient Copper City Ruins. Lan is an atheist, and he does not think that in the next year, he will chat with him online. It will be Li Hao's ghost. No matter whether Li Hao died for real or faked, and no matter who the person behind the ID was, in short, after the Battle of Bronze City, the intelligence dealer never contacted Lan again, and the ID has always remained gray. Offline and never lit up again. This time, if Lan wants to break the situation, it is obviously impossible to rely on external forces. He once again brought his attention back to his eyes. The gunshots in the factories where gun battles broke out had disappeared at this time. A group of security personnel wearing the same dark blue overalls as Lan were carrying away the corpses one by one. Come out and place them side by side on the construction site outside the factory. Most of these corpses were staff members wearing white uniforms. Only one security guard wearing dark blue uniforms died in the crossfire. An announcement from the security center came over the intercom, to the effect that one of the newly recruited workers last week had spies planted by the resistance organization. These spies stole the factory's weapons arsenal and set up an improvised explosive device in the second factory. Their primary purpose was not to destroy the component being assembled in the central workshop, it was too difficult to destroy that thing. Just getting close to the shed required 6 security checks, so the people of the resistance organization settled for the next best thing. The targets were selected experienced engineers in various factories. They believe that as long as enough engineers are killed, the progress of the assembly project will be greatly delayed, thereby buying more time for the resistance organization's next move. P.S. Thanks to Rookhang for the 1000 starting coins.